Good morning, America. Sorry I missed the intro. I had to get up really early and I'm a little bit tired. I'm going to drop my son off at the airport around 4:30 this morning. So we've got a very interesting topic today, a lot to talk about, and we're going to be talking about economic freedom again. How does this affect countries? How does that affect tax policy? We're going to be talking about not only global, but also how does that affect our local tax policy and the different opinions about that. And we're going to wrap up talking about personal economic freedom and some of the things that you can do for your household to prepare for, to deal with higher tax debts, to avoid owing the IRS, but also to be prepared. So I'm really looking forward to today's episode. There's a lot to talk about and discuss. First article I'm going to want to share is about Boeing. Boeing has still been in the news. My wife actually took a flight yesterday, my son this morning, and we were joking about, I hope it's not a Boeing jet that they're taking. So Boeing has had so many issues. He's been dragged onto Capitol Hill to face questioning. What is going on with your company? What are you guys doing wrong over there? So this is the first time Boeing CEO David Calhoun or any other top official at Boeing has been forced to testify. This is before a Senate subcommittee. So these are this is not a right-left thing. This is a huge problem that's bothering both parties, and they're trying to figure out what's going on and try to get to the bottom of this. So in quick history here, so they had people that died in two crashes of Boeing 737 MAX jetliners. I believe it was 2018 and 19. They had a panel blew out of a 737 in January. And then you had here a Boeing jet lost an engine. Another one lost the front wheel while landing. Great pilots. The nose wheel just fell off as it went to land. And so it's just a concern here. What's going on? How do we fix this? There's a story about the fake titanium parts coming from China, making their way into jet airplanes, which is scary to say the least. So, American companies are strong when there's accountability. In what form? I think they should be forced to, I think transparency is important to a certain extent, but I also think that when you have issues like this, they should be accountable, and the best way to do that is to have competition. If there are plenty of other jets out there, people will just say, look, I'm just not going to fly on a Boeing jet. And it might get to that point. We're not there yet. So stepping to the next article, this is a big issue that nobody really talks about. And this is the dominance of the dollar globally. And so, the title of the article, and this is from the Federalist, is if Biden's economy were quote unquote strong, our trade partners wouldn't be de-dollarizing. What does that mean to de-dollarize? So the dollar historically has been the main currency used in international trade. That makes the dollar very strong. It increases the demand for the dollar, and it really just makes it that much easier for us to buy and sell goods here in the United States. It's one of the reasons we can afford all kinds of products made overseas, because our currency is strong compared to other countries. There's a lot of doom and gloom out there if other countries would ditch the dollar. Historically, there's been very little competition to the dollar, but so most people, if previous to when the dollar was stronger, if Peru was buying oil from Saudi Arabia, they would take their Peruvian sols, put them in dollars, and then use the dollars to buy oil from Saudi Arabia. And the their currency, this Riyadh in Saudi Arabia, or peso, Peruvian peso, and Peru would not be the actual medium of exchange. It would all be done in dollars. Now, big concern here. We had an agreement for the last 50 years. There was a petrodollar agreement between the U.S. and Saudi Arabia that designated that the U.S. dollar would be the currency for all global oil trade. It worked very well because the dollar was very solid. It was very predictable. Now we're having high inflation, similar to the 70s again. So high inflation, and talks about tariffs, extended tariffs on other countries are some of the reasons, but also China is looking to challenge us economically in many ways, and undercutting the dollar, undercutting U.S. interests across the globe has been, their bread and butter for probably the last 20 years, and we have been asleep at the helm. It's been more than 20 years, but again, we have been very kind to China in many ways, and they have not returned the favor. They've done everything they can to erode American power. Now, why wasn't this extended? Good question. It's already expired. It's not going to get renewed. And one of the big reasons is U.S. sanctions. So we talked about U.S. sanctions. You have unprecedented U.S. sanctions and European sanctions against Russia as their per their invasion of Ukraine. But I talked about, instead of sanctioning them, we've done what would have been a lot more intelligent and then better use of the market to just produce oil like crazy. When President Trump did that, Russia was at the mercy of the United States because the oil was cheap and they couldn't get nearly as much money for their oil. Under President Biden, we slapped sanctions on them. The price of oil went up and they made a killing. So Russia has not suffered, economically wise. They've been making more money than ever by selling their oil. And who have they been selling their oil to? Brazil, China, and you have the BRICS coalition, which is anti-dollar nations led by China. So only 40% of world trade today is done with the U.S. dollar, down from 52% just a decade ago. And we've seen a market decline in years since. What is that going to do to our economy? It's yet to be seen. There's a lot of people that feel that it's going to cause a huge drop in standard of living for Americans. But we have yet to see. So again, this is cause for concern. It talks about Russia, China, and some of the worst countries out there. But even some of our quote unquote allies like India, Brazil, and then South Africa is joined in 2009, and they are, with the end of the petrodollar, in February they added Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE. Many of those are our allies, all joining the BRICS coalition to trade outside the dollar. And of course, China is looking to dominate that BRICS coalition. And then you have Venezuela looking to be part of that as well. Again, subject to tariffs, or not tariffs, sanctions. So sanctions can bite in the short term. Long term, they lose their effectiveness because people go around it. So the solution to many problems it's like the old adage or story of the gentleman going along, and you have the wind and the sun, and the wind tells them that they make this bet that they can make this guy take off his jacket, and the wind blows and blows and blows, and he just holds to his jacket tighter. And then the wind gives up, the sun comes out and just shines on him, and he takes the jacket off. Instead of sanctions, which sound good, if we just crash their economies by increasing production with our economic might, which we still have a lot of economic might, we could have put Russia in the poorhouse. I don't know if they would have stopped the invasion of Ukraine, but it would have really hurt their economy and done so much more damage than just sanctions. Long-term sanctions have just hurt us. So again, part of this is because of inflation, record high mortgage rates, and an uncertain job market, which has been very iffy at best lately. So something to watch for, something to be aware of as we learn from things. So as we see what happens with our economy. Coming up on another break, but I think we have time to just start this. So this is from the Foundation of Economic Education. And I think this is really interesting. This comes from a right-wing perspective, to be fair. But there hasn't been a lot of talk in the news. If you've heard about the European elections, it's a blip because the United States is really bad about not caring about the rest of the world. I can be very guilty of that too. Europe made a sharp turn to the right. So 350 million Europeans voted for their representatives in the European Parliament. So this is a very big thing. It kind of dictates where they're going as far as policy. So the Conservative European People's Party secured 189 seats compared to 130 of the Social Democrat Party. So the big losers here were Green parties. The big winners here were more centrist and conservative right parties. So why is this happening? So I kind of want to skip through. There's a few things that, especially for American readers, what's happening in the rise of nationalist parties, of center-right parties. And there's 2 points they talk about. The decline of green parties, but also the rise of alternative right parties. And the main reasons why is they want national self-determination, so nations to still have more independence. And the second reason are, it doesn't say here, or so the leftist position is more for a more powerful EU, and we're up against the break, so we'll be back shortly. Welcome back, everybody, and thank you for watching live Ron Reed broadcast. We're diving into the elections in Europe, and it's kind of interesting. Before we get back to the article, President Biden just went to Europe and met with a bunch of G7 leaders in Italy. Most of those leaders had just been voted out of office, so they're still the leaders, but come January they'll be replaced, and the hope is that there's a new era of European leadership, and this is why. So some of the big factors, two fundamental factors between the last, why you had such a market shift, not only in national elections, but also in the European Parliament. First of all, stagnation. So again, where the economy has been relatively stagnant for the last 20 years. And our own economy here in the United States has had up and downs, but especially following the crash in 2008, it took until 13, 14 for the economy to really start improving. And then again, we had COVID again, but it really has been very up and down as far as our economy. The second factor really hitting Europe is immigration. We have the same problem here in the United States. You have wide open borders, a lot of, especially in Germany, and people are reacting to that because immigration drives prices up, drives housing up. It has an effect throughout the economy. Usually it's net positive in the long term, but as long as you're letting the right, people that aren't, going to commit crimes, that people aren't going to be drug dealers, people that are going to help build society, not tear it down. And that's one of the big problems in Europe, is that you have a lot of issues going on with crime, and there's some, there's a lot of concerns with that throughout Europe. Now, some of the most urgent issues in Europe: lack of innovation and growth. So when you don't have economic freedom, you don't have a lot of economic growth. Innovation and growth. So you've had some countries that have done better than others, but overall in the EU, they've had top-down centralized decision making where people have a hard time making their own decisions. One of the concerns here, and this is definitely coming from a right-leaning perspective, but living and believing in growth through subsidies. So direct government intervention where the government picks winners and losers. It's in providing public funding for whatever sector that is favored or popular at the time. Again, the vast majority of the people are sick of it. Again, you have two classes divisions: one that struggles to maintain a decent life in developed countries, and the other one that lives well off of subsidies, fostering resentment by the majority of the people. We have a lot of subsidies here in the United States. I'm for getting rid of most of them, and there's very few politicians that will stand up and say that. The problem is that we have competitors, China being the worst, that subsidize like crazy. And so if we need to address that some way, tariffs might be one option, but they can also hurt in the long run. So there's a lot to handle, but turning things around, can they actually do this? And one of the big ways that they're planning to do this is to get the government out of the way. Reverse a lot of policies, going to more commercial openness and decentralization. One of the examples is banning gas engines, gas vehicles. So, going all EVs. That's something that's, again, when we're seeing this in the United States, it's not as practical as you would think. It's causing a lot of issues. So we're going to see a common thread here. The next article Now I'm looking at the EU, where we're getting away from centralization, getting rid of, the European Parliament telling and dictating all the countries, you will do this, you will do that, but letting people make decisions for themselves. And this is I really like this article. It goes back to Vietnam, and it starts off talking about this little boy when he was 8 years old. He had to go to a food distribution center because it was controlled by the communists. And he said the officials were not friendly. They used to cheat them by putting rocks in their rice so that it would weigh heavier and they would give them less rice. And it was just, the children couldn't do anything. And so there was a lot of hardship and starvation in Vietnam. So Vietnam, we all know about it from the Vietnam War. But in 1975, that's when Saigon fell. 2 years after the withdrawal of U.S. troops, that was pretty much it. So the communists had promised to rebuild our land 10 times more beautiful. Yeah, have you heard those promises before? And it was, they did the same thing that Mao and Stalin did. They saw how bad things were with Mao and Stalin, but they went ahead because this was the communist ideology. If it's done right, we can really help people. And they had 5-year plans, just like they did in China. Instead of setting aggressive goals, 8 to 10% growth, instead they got 2% annually. Large part because they went and they collectivized, which means the government owned nearly 25% of the farms in South Vietnam. And in just a few years, by 1980, they're producing 14 million tons of rice, even though they needed 16 million tons to feed their people. So now Vietnam was importing rice. So what happened? Which change? And someone said in the late 1980s, he said, the Americans couldn't destroy Hanoi, but we have destroyed our city by very low rents. So they put in price controls on almost everything, thinking the government just could control everything. And price controls, especially rent control properties, are very destructive to cities. It's the quickest way to destroy a city, in the opinion of many. When you look at our cities here in the United States, where you have rent controls, you have massive distortions that favor very few people that are connected or happen to have rent control, and they stay in those properties forever till they die and try to pass it on to their children, etc. The politically connected usually tend to get these very great benefits, but the average person suffers from even higher rent than ever. So by 1980, Vietnam was the poorest country in the world, worse than Somalia, Ethiopia, and Madagascar. And it was the poorest for a year until the 1990s. Finally, in the 1990s, even as late as 93, 80% of the population lived in poverty. But it didn't stay poor. Today, the poverty rate is roughly 4%. Now, when compared to the United States, their poverty level is, they don't have the income that we do. They're not buying $80,000 cars, etc. But it talks about how, first of all, how not to escape poverty. Burundi, Central African Republic, Democratic Republic of Congo, Madagascar, Somalia. They were the world's poorest nations a quarter century ago, and they are still the world's poorest. They receive the most foreign aid, but the contention is foreign aid it destroys local economies, it forces dependence on aid from other countries rather than helping the country build themselves up, building local industries. Foreign aid can cause more damage than good. Kind of like the war on poverty. We've spent trillions and trillions of dollars on this war on poverty even since Johnson, and you can argue our ghettos are worse than ever. There's whole areas of downtown cities that are pretty much shells. You won't go there. You shouldn't go there. It's very dangerous to go there. And they're very neglected by politicians, by businesses, because why would someone go there? And it's only been accelerated with the George Floyd movement and the destruction and burning of a lot of local businesses. So they just leave. You're going to burn our business? Okay, well, we just won't sell there anymore. What else are they going to do? And one of the concerns is when you have decades of international aid, they're far better at feeding bureaucracies than actually helping the majority of the people. Tanzania, we see billions of dollars of aid to improve its road system. 2 decades later, the roads are still a mess, but they have a much larger government bureaucracy, which produces what? Red tape. They do all kinds of reports for its aid donors. And who sent the billion recipient 1,000 missions of donor officials per year. So all kinds of more tourism, but as the economy actually improving, this article argues not. So top-down solutions where outside economists think they know what's going on, they don't. And there's a funny story. Frank Bremer, who was a aid worker for 30 years, well, in more than 30 countries, a local villager is telling an expert, hey, we need a dam. That's what we really need. But the expert says, no, you don't need a dam. What you need is a well. And he didn't listen, but it's like, come on. We need the dam for electricity, for all kinds of other stuff. And he's like, no, we'll just do a well for you. And he's like, won't listen to people actually all feet on the ground. When you enable people, local people, they know what they need. They know, many times they know what would help them. And here the argument is millions of Africa are poor today because of aid. Misery and poverty have not ended, but increased. And one of the big reasons for that, though, is they're still dangerous countries. They're still very volatile. You still have a lot of war. You have Muslim extremists that regularly attack villages and kill people. So you don't have safety of property or of your person. It's very hard to build an a successful economy based when people don't feel protected, when the rule of law is not enforced. So going back to Vietnam, aid to Vietnam through the 1980s and 90s was drying up because the Soviet Union was going through its own collapse. So billions of dollars in aid that would have been sent to Vietnam were not sent. And so here, if the aid's being cut off, you would expect the country to crash. And so they ignored economic incentives. So here's one, I'm not even going to try to say that. But he was saying that his mother, like all farm workers working in cooperatives where they didn't own anything, it's all run by the state, they were compensated on the numbers of days worked, not how many hours they actually worked or the amount of food they produced or the quality of the work. So they just showed up. They would slack off, be sloppy, or arrive late to their jobs because they got paid the same no matter what. So it really collapsed. And in the 90s, they actually had a very, very unique thing for governments. This is known as fence breaking. And this is where first of all, they started to turn a blind eye to the black market, which became more and more popular. But then in 1986, the Sixth Party of Congress embraced it. They said, okay, we know the black market is actually helping people. What we're doing isn't. And they did radical self-criticism and said, look, we had 5-year plans with almost no success. We have to change what we're doing. So they had, this is huge for government to actually acknowledge their mistakes and do a radical change here. So they said they did not try to blame other external factors, even though they very easily could have. And they started making serious change. They got rid of price controls and subsidies. So you think subsidies for programs in a very poor country would make sense. But by allowing competition and the government getting out of picking winners and losers, the successful companies and businesses thrived. They got rid of domestic customs checkpoints, so they allowed for free trade within their country. Now they allowed private companies to start to thrive, up to 10 workers. It's gone up since then. They got rid of regulations on private companies, deregulated the banking system. We could use that. And then they started returning businesses that had been seized by the government before. So they really took a huge step back, and I've seen other countries do this. Peru did this. And it led to this renaissance of Vietnam. Now, are they the top earner in the world? No. Their income increased fivefold to around $11,400 a year, which isn't the top things, but I mean, now they're exporting. Now, once it was just coffee, coconuts, and rice. Now it's computers, mobile phones, and other electronics that Vietnam exports. And it's one of our top 10 trading partners, which is why you see products from Vietnam. And there's other countries with similar stories, but where you get rid of the government, get the government out of the way, and allow people to succeed and thrive, that's where you see economic success. And you see it in country after country, which is why the other day I shared the article, or yesterday I shared the article about economic freedom and what people thought about capitalism. Here in the United States and throughout the developed world, we have a very negative perception of capitalism, whereas in the developing world, where they're seeing all the benefits of freedom, economic freedom, and capitalism, they love it. There's a lot more. I mean, so spoiled people problems when we have too many generations. So switching real quick to the IRS, bringing it home. The IRS wants to end another magic tax loophole for the wealthy and raise $50 billion in the process. Now, $50 billion sounds like a big number over 10 years. So $5 billion a year when it comes to the U.S. government is not that much. It really is a drop in the bucket. But the IRS came out with this big announcement. The AP and other ones came out. Other news sources came out. Look, the IRS is going after the rich, closing a major loophole. I don't think this is a major loophole. It's a tax shelter. If people are using this incorrectly, close it out, whatever. But the problem is the IRS's ongoing effort to zero on high wealth tax cheats. Being in the trenches, working day in and day out, the IRS is not going after the wealthy. They're going after average, everyday Americans, making it harder than ever, violating people's rights, not following their own taxpayer bill of rights. And it's harder than ever to get through, actually talk to the IRS and get something done. And then even then when you get through, half the time they give you bad information. So I can't tell you how many times I have people call in. They call me and say, well, so-and-so said this and this and this. I'm like, no, they're wrong. I can show you where they're wrong. It's just nuts. Okay, so jumping to the next story, we're going to talk about domestic tax policy. So we talked a lot about global tax and what's working internationally, what isn't, what direction the European Union is going in, and want to kind of wrap up with where are we headed here in the United States and what are our options. And it's not all roses one way or the other. There are a lot of concerns going back and forth. I'm going to share those when we come back after this next break. But again, this first article, anytime someone says, I'm an economist, listen to me, it makes me stop and think, they're saying I'm an expert, listen to me. We'll see where it goes. But I will be back shortly. Hubert Johnson here again with Taxes Made Easy, and just focusing here on this next article, how a Trump win would impact the middle class taxes, for better or for worse. So, does Trump want to cut taxes? Yes, he talks about it all the time. He definitely wants to keep the Trump tax cuts in place, and he's talking about reducing taxes even further. So again, the Trump's tax cuts could be extended even further, not only for a longer period of time, but also continue to increase the standard deductions and also lowering tax rates across the board. Let's see what happens with that. One thing Trump did when he first came into office the first time, deregulation was a huge part of his platform, and they started deregulating as soon as possible. So you talk about in Vietnam, they deregulated, they got rid of the red tape. Now Vietnam still has a long ways to go. They're rated about number 50 is on the Economic Freedom Index. But they're going in the right direction, and they're seeing huge improvements in their economy and in the lives of their people by adopting more capitalist policies and working with capitalism. The thing is, capitalism as an idea, it's around no matter where you go. The effects of it are felt. So either under communist countries where they control everything, it ends up in shortages, huge bread lines, or what you can afford is just priced out of your reach. So again, the results are there, as described by capitalism. Capitalism just an attempt to explain what actually happens in the real world. And by understanding it, you can improve your situation. So again, the whole point is to deregulate and do new policies. The Biden administration has gone the other way. They've added layers upon layers of regulation, even trying to regulate gas stoves, gas appliances, etc. One of the things they've talked about is putting a 60% tariff on Chinese goods and a 10% on all other global trading partners. The problem with this is when you do tariffs, it's kind of like sanctions. They might have an initial effect, and this is prior to income tax over 100 years ago. The United States government was funded by tariffs on foreign goods. Now it's mostly funded by income tax, taxing American citizens. If you switch that up, it does initially help American goods and products, but other countries are going to respond in kind, which lowers global trade and can cause a lot of problems. So I'm not sold on this idea of eliminating the income tax and just doing it on tariffs. If they use it as a way to put a chokehold on government growth and actually get rid of a lot of the bureaucracy, a la Argentina, and President Milei down there, I think it could be great. But again, the last part of this, she said, we're not sure what they're going to go, but they're talking about revisiting healthcare. If you have high subsidies and you're on Obamacare or ACA plans through the exchanges, it can be great. So I think there's going to be a lot of uproar if they try to get rid of that. The problem is private health insurance has gotten so much worse because of it, and they can't afford to compete. So it's either massive government subsidies, which again is we're spending money like water, we can't afford it. But I think there are a lot of common sense changes that you can do to Medicare, Social Security, to stop the government from borrowing and stealing those funds, and making sure that those that abuse the system are held accountable, or they get specialized help to keep them from revolving through our emergency rooms, which is using up so many resources. There are better ways to deal with that, and none of that was considered through Obamacare. And this is an article from the left, and I actually agree with this. From the Intelligencer, it's not an article or news source that I'm familiar with, but he really goes in and says, look, in many ways. You get rid of the tariff. If you put a tariff in place and get rid of income tax, who's going to bear the brunt of that? It would be very aggressive. It would be the poorest people that get hurt by the increasing costs. Everything is going to cost more that we import. Encourages our own economy to produce for our own economy, but producers are trying to compete globally. So, this guy's very much anti-Trump, but I think we can absolutely learn from the Republican Party. There's a wealthy heir who's broadly supported by CEOs and other rich people, and he uses a lot of tax language. But if you don't understand what the other side is talking about, I think you are doing yourself a disservice. So he's saying that why, and his question is, why does he have this populist image when he reduces taxes? His claim is that it just benefits the wealthy, which is not true. It helps people across the board. So he's talking about the plan to jack up tariffs, and even high enough to replace income tax, and then cutting corporate income tax again from 20% down to possibly 15%. The protectionist agenda is not necessarily a good agenda, because again, we're not just our economy is a global one, and I would be interesting to see how this plays out, discuss it, but I don't know if this is the way to go. It can absolutely hurt the poorest in society, and those that struggle to afford basic goods. A lot of our food is imported, a lot of our goods are imported. But if we had those jobs here, it might help as well, but it's very nationalist in some ways. I agree that it's short-sighted. Should we stick it to China? Absolutely. Should we stick it to all of our other trade partners that aren't acting in the worst interest of America, like China? No, we should be working with our allies. We should be expanding our influence, not losing it through losing the petrodollar exchange. We should be working with our allies to counter the influence of China, Russia, and other bad actors across the world. So I think it would be great to target China for their abuse and to get other countries on board to, especially when they're subsidizing their industries like crazy just to undercut and sell cheaper goods just to undercut domestic production. That's unfair competition. That shouldn't be permitted. It shouldn't be tolerated. But raising tariffs on all countries, I don't know if that's the way to go. And so he goes back to this idea that the difference between populists and the establishment, and he argues that Trump is actually more of the establishment here, which is really kind of ironic because the Republican establishment really went against him, same as the Democrat establishment. But again, I'm not sold on the tariff scheme. I think this does have some good information about that. Again, he calls Trump an idiot and all that other stuff. He claims he's completely ignorant on economics, which I don't think is very fair. I think he does know a lot about economics, more than this writer. But at the same time, tariffs come with their own issues and damage to the economy. In contrast, this is Fox article news, Elizabeth Warren came out and she's telling Democrats, her fellow Democrats, stand firm on tax hikes. So the way they label it, of course, it's Fox News. It's not very fair to Elizabeth Warren, but tax hikes being eliminating and getting rid of the Trump tax cuts. So Joe Biden and most Democrats are for getting rid of the Trump tax cuts. I don't know why they don't make these permanent in the first place when they have the opportunity. But they will automatically expire if nothing is done by the end of 2025. So she said, all we have to do is stand by our guns and taxes will go up. Large corporations will pay higher taxes, and she wants the wealthy tax sheets to be sweaty because the IRS has enough money to enforce the law. I don't know if she understands how the IRS actually works, but they're going after everybody. It's not just the wealthy, and they're putting the screws to poor and rich alike. And that's absolutely what we've seen, and I get very frustrated when they claim that the IRS is just going after the wealthy. They repeat this ad nauseum, and it's not true. So again, she wants money for social spending to help the poorest in society. But part of it, it's really hard to stand against, hey, I'm going to vote for tax increases. And in some ways, she's right. That I'd rather see the Democrats and the Republicans do what they say rather than campaign one way and then govern another way. So at least she is honest in her opinions and what she wants to have happen. And I think being well informed as to what their true agenda is enables taxpayers to make an informed decision. So kind of a funny story. We talk about inner cities, and I mentioned some of our big cities we have rampant crime. So President Biden was in LA for a big fundraiser with President Obama, and one of his Secret Service members or agents got robbed Saturday night at 9:40. So he was robbed at gunpoint. They stole his bag. He returned fire after they ran away. But again, this is in the greater Los Angeles area, southern LA, close to Irvine. So they saw a vehicle leaving the scene. They'll probably never capture these people. They're probably long gone. But they've had a lot of crime happening in especially in more liberal cities. Washington, D.C., it's so ridiculous. You've had political staffers, and people working at the Capitol that have had their cars jacked, or they've been robbed at gunpoint, and even some politicians that have been robbed at gunpoint. In San Francisco, famously, Nancy Pelosi's husband had someone break into his home. It was kind of a crazy story, but took a hammer to his head. Didn't kill him, thank goodness, but greatly injured him. I think these incidents are on the rise, and to the point that we're not keeping people's persons safe and people's property safe. That's a scary thing. And how can you invest in your future, build up for your home and long-term success for you and your family if your person and your property can't be safe? So again, kind of an ironic thing. He goes there, and one of the people there to protect him gets robbed. It's can you imagine going and robbing a bodyguard? Because that's exactly what happened. I shouldn't laugh, but it's kind of funny. I didn't get to it. We're gonna have to get to it tomorrow. But taking this and applying it to your personal life, that's what we're going to focus on tomorrow. How do you have more economic freedom? How do you make decisions in your life to prepare for and use a lot of these for your advantage? So we're going to talk about that hopefully tomorrow, or it might have to be next week, or I'm sorry, Thursday. But I'd love to. We're going to take a deep dive into that, and I hope you all have a great day out there. And just as you look through the news, get online and just kind of scroll through some things. Try to pay attention to what brings economic freedom, and how does that actually help or hurt economies and societies. So again, yesterday I was talking about how. A liberal communist was commenting about how out west, they have all these plans for the homeless and housed, and that homelessness has exploded and made worse than ever. Just throwing money at problems doesn't solve the issues. Whereas in Texas and other areas, they have very little homeless compared to other areas. But they're not throwing money at the issue. And they allow construction, they allow people the freedom to adjust and build homes and improve their lives as they see fit. So it really, nothing's perfect with Texas, nothing's perfect with California, or completely wrong with California. But I think as we take a better approach and consider the economic realities and how things can actually affect not only the poor, but again, everybody talks about global hunger and in poverty. Some of the best ways to do that are exactly the opposite of what we do as a nation. And we talk about foreign aid, we have to give foreign aid. We might do much better than just throwing money at countries and making them dependent on US aid. So on that note, hope you have a great day, and we will see you tomorrow.